The Resolute dropped from slipstream into the shadow of Zerath Prime, and the stars changed. Gone was the open emptiness of space. Now the sky swarmed with warships. They were not the sleek cruisers of the Galactic Council or the modular vessels of human fleets. These ships were predators given steel bodies. Their jagged hulls caught the light of the red sun, spines bristling with weapon arrays that tracked the Resolute the moment she appeared. Elias Kane stood before the observation deck, hands clasped loosely behind his back. His reflection cut across the glass, eyes scanning the formation with the same precision he once used on battlefield maps. This wasn't an honor guard, it was a firing squad in parade formation. Beside him, Lieutenant Arya Voss shifted uneasily. "They're close," she murmured. "Too close for a welcome. They want us to feel small," Elias replied without looking at her. "It won't work." Her gaze flicked to the warships again. "If this goes wrong." "It won't," he said, cutting her off, though his tone was calm rather than dismissive. "The point of peace talks is not to make friends. It's to win without firing a shot." The diplomatic shuttle detached, falling into a slow descent. 6 Zorathian attack craft closed in around them, their positions so tight Elias could make out the heat ripples from their thrusters. Zerath Prime grew in the viewport, a world of jagged continents and deep crimson seas. Their destination rose on the horizon, the War Palace, carved into a mountainside of black stone. Its spires were topped with banners the size of human frigates, each bearing the clawed sigil of the Zorathian Empire. The architecture spoke of power, not elegance. Every arch, every wall seemed built to withstand siege. The shuttle's landing struts touched down on a massive stone platform, the air heavy with heat and the faint metallic tang of alien industry. Rows of Zorathian guards waited, each one an armored giant standing nearly twice a man's height. Arya whispered, "I count 50. That's just what's visible. They want us to notice," Elias said, straightening his jacket. The king arrived without announcement, the crowd parting as if pushed by some invisible force. Zerith V was even taller than the guards, his 4 arms sheathed in black exoskeletal armor inlaid with gold veins. His skin, what little showed between armor plates, was a deep obsidian scaled with a faint iridescence. Twin golden eyes locked on Elias with the patience of a predator deciding whether to kill now or play with its prey first. Tradition dictated that Elias kneel. He inclined his head, just enough to signal respect, not enough to suggest subservience. The distinction was intentional. "Your people arrive unarmed," Zerith said, his voice a low, resonant growl. "Is this surrender?" Elias met his gaze without flinching. "We have no need to carry weapons. We are the weapons." For a fraction of a second, silence hung over the landing platform. Then the king's mandibles twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. They walked together toward the palace gates, the king leading, Elias half a step behind but never directly in his shadow. Guards lined the path, weapons held low but always ready. The massive gates opened to reveal the Hall of Blades, a vaulted corridor lined with weapons from centuries of conquest. A guard stepped forward, presenting Elias with a ceremonial sword as a gesture of welcome. The expected act was clear: display the blade as a sign of alliance. Elias took the weapon, tested its weight briefly, then handed it back with a courteous nod and kept walking. A ripple of murmurs passed through the guards. Arya's glance was quick but sharp. Elias said nothing. Inside the War Palace, the air was cooler but heavy with incense and the faint musk of the Zorathians themselves, an earthy, metallic scent. Torchlight glinted off polished stone walls etched with scenes of war. Every image depicted the same story: Zorathians victorious, enemies broken. The reception chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Zorathian nobles stood along the edges, each adorned in armor worked with personal insignias. Every set of eyes followed Elias' movements, weighing him, testing him. Zerith gestured toward the dais at the far end. "Here we speak of war and peace." Elias allowed a small smile. "In my experience, they're often the same conversation." When the formalities ended for the day, Elias and Arya were shown to their quarters, spacious by alien standards, though the deliberate absence of locking doors was noted. As attendants withdrew, Arya turned on him. You ignored half their customs today. That's not how peace talks work. On the contrary, Elias said, removing his jacket and hanging it neatly. That's exactly how they work with a culture like this. Deference invites dominance. Measured defiance forces respect. She folded her arms. Or it gets us both executed before talks even start. Elias moved to the wide window, looking out over the alien city. Below, avenues were filled with soldiers marching in perfect formations, their armor catching the red sun. If he's angry, he's thinking about me, he said. If he's thinking about me, he's not thinking about war. Not yet. The faint hum of the Resolute docked far below reached them through the walls. For a moment, Elias stood still, watching the city shift into shadow as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Somewhere in this fortress, he knew, the king was already planning how to break the talks. That was fine. Elias had his own plan. The council chamber of Zerath Prime was not designed for comfort. It was built to intimidate. A perfect circle of black stone, the walls climbed so high they disappeared into shadows. Massive war banners hung between towering statues of Zorathian conquerors, each carved in aggressive poses. The air smelled faintly of heated metal and burning resin. At the center, a long crescent table split the chamber. On one side, King Zereth and his warlords. On the other, Elias Kane and Arya Voss, the only humans in a hall of giants. Along the upper tier, Galactic Council observers sat behind a shimmering barrier, neutral but watchful. The king wasted no time. 12 of your colonies, Zereth began, voice echoing in the chamber, will become protectorates under Zorathian law. In return, your species will be spared destruction. Elias didn't move. You will also provide tribute, the king continued. Resources from your war fleets, to be delivered yearly. And your highest-ranking commanders will reside here, as honored guests. The pause after honored was deliberate. Arya's eyes flicked toward Elias. He didn't look at her. When the king finished, the hall was silent but for the low hum of the barrier above. Elias finally leaned forward. You're asking us to dismantle our defenses, surrender territory, and offer hostages. That is ambitious. The king's mandibles twitched in amusement. It is mercy. Elias tapped a finger lightly against the polished stone table. We can agree on one thing. A lasting peace requires both sides to feel secure. Ziritha's golden eyes narrowed. And you believe surrender would not provide this security? For you? Perhaps, Elias said. For us? No. He paused, letting the words settle. However, in the spirit of compromise, I offer something symbolic. An asteroid in the breach belt, uninhabited, rich in nothing but ice. Yours, as a gesture of goodwill. A few of the warlords hissed in low tones. Even Arya stiffened. The gift was meaningless, and every alien in the room knew it. The king's claws tapped the table once, sharp against the stone. You insult us in our own hall. Not an insult, Elias replied evenly. An opportunity. You can tell your people you claim new territory without shedding blood. They'll celebrate your wisdom as much as your strength. The king rose slightly, towering over the table. Do you think we will beg for your lives? Elias didn't blink. Begging implies you have a choice. The chamber froze. Several guards shifted, hands brushing the grips of their weapons. Arya's breath caught, but she kept her gaze fixed ahead. Finally, the king sank back into his seat. We will reconvene tomorrow. Consider your position carefully, human. Back in their assigned quarters, Arya shut the door and turned on Elias. You just told him he had no choice. In front of his generals. Yes, Elias said, unfastening the collar of his jacket. He could have had you killed right there. No, Elias corrected. He couldn't. Killing me in front of the council would strip him of legitimacy. He's not ready to risk that. She paced. You're pushing him toward war. Elias lowered his voice. No. I'm pushing him toward hesitation. That's the opening we need. Arya stopped. Opening for what? Elias leaned against the desk, folding his arms. I've been reading their honor code. If a ruler dies in ceremonial combat or under certain conditions considered natural, war plans are halted until succession is resolved. Sometimes years. Long enough for cooler heads to take over. Her expression hardened. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about preventing a war that will kill billions, Elias said quietly. And I'll do it without a battle. That evening, the king invited Elias to a banquet in the Hall of the Sun, a long chamber with a glass ceiling filtering the red light into deep, bloody hues. The tables were carved from single slabs of volcanic rock, laden with platters of alien delicacies. Half the dishes were unrecognizable: luminous fungi, strips of meat that twitched faintly, spheres of dark liquid suspended in gelatin. Elias took his seat directly across from the king. Arya sat to his left, tense and silent. Midway through the meal, Zirith gestured for a servant, who brought a shallow bowl filled with iridescent strips of flesh. From the spine fish of the Korth seas, the king said. A delicacy. But dangerous for those unprepared. It unsettles weaker systems. Arya's eyes widened. It was a test. A poison to anyone without Zorathian biology. Elias picked up a strip with the provided clawed utensil, studied it briefly, and ate it in one slow bite. The taste was sharp, metallic, but he didn't flinch. He swallowed, set the utensil down, and met the king's gaze. The king said nothing, but his eyes glinted with something between irritation and respect. As the feast continued, conversation turned to war history. The king recounted victories over species Elias had never heard of, all ending in annihilation of the defeated. You humans, Zirith said at last, are prey animals. Clever, perhaps, but always running from the stronger hunter. You will learn the peace of submission. Elias' reply was quiet, but it cut through the hall. Predators starve when the prey stops running. The words hung in the air. Some of the nobles shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Elias as though seeing him for the first time. Zirith regarded him for several long seconds, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. When Elias returned to his quarters, he retrieved a small case from his personal trunk. Inside lay a ceremonial Terran dagger, steel polished to a mirror, handle wrapped in worn leather. He turned it in his hands, feeling its weight. Arya entered quietly. You've made your decision. I already had, Elias said. She didn't argue. Instead, she looked at the blade, then at him. If you fail, I won't. He set the dagger back in its case and closed it gently, as if sealing the decision with it. Outside, the alien city pulsed with torchlight, shadows crawling over the black stone. Somewhere in the palace, the king was sleeping, certain he would dictate the terms of peace tomorrow. Elias Kane intended to end the war before it began. The council chamber felt colder than before. The air was still, the shadows deep. Elias Kane stood at the table's edge, facing King Zirith across the polished black stone. Between them, the room seemed to hum with tension. Arya Voss stood at his side, her posture composed but her gaze sharp, scanning every movement. The king's voice broke the silence. We will end this farce now. You have until the third sunrise to surrender your colonies. Refuse, and we will strike. Gasps from the Galactic Council observers echoed faintly from the balcony above. No one spoke against him. They couldn't. The rules of neutrality were iron. Elias let the words hang in the air, giving them time to settle like smoke. Then he said, If this is the final day of talks, it should end with a gift. From my people to yours. The tradition was old, spanning cultures, the ceremonial exchange. Zorathian law demanded it on the last day of negotiations, even failed once. Elias reached into a slim case and withdrew the Terran dagger, polished steel glinting in the dim light, the leather hilt worn from generations of human hands. This blade was carried by a soldier who fought in Earth's first planetary war. It was used only once, to take the life of a man who would have destroyed millions. I offer it as a symbol of peace. That strength need not be used, but kept ready. Ziritha's golden eyes studied the dagger. Slowly, He rose from his seat and stepped forward. His claws closed around the hilt, testing its weight. Small. Elegant. But hardly a weapon of war. Elias stepped closer, the movement smooth, unhurried. That depends on how it's used. The king turned the blade in his hands, examining the edge. Elias reached to demonstrate a grip, a subtle pivot, placing his body at an angle only Arya, watching closely, would recognize. His right hand brushed the king's gauntlet, guiding it as though teaching a form. The strike was invisible to all but the most trained eye. A precise press of the blade into a narrow seam beneath the collar joint of the armor, a gap only wide enough for a sliver of steel. The movement was quick, almost casual, the dagger's tip sliding no more than a few centimeters. Zareth froze. His golden eyes widened slightly, then his body relaxed, as if he had merely shifted his stance. The blade was withdrawn without a trace of blood. A heartbeat later, the king staggered. The hall erupted in alarm. Guards rushed forward, but council observers shouted for restraint. Zareth collapsed into his throne, head tilting unnaturally to one side. His breathing was shallow, erratic, then stopped. The chief medic pushed past the guards, scanning him with a device that emitted soft pulses of light. After a tense minute, the medic looked up. "Neural failure," he announced. "A rare collapse of the spinal nerve cluster." Zorathian law was clear. The death of a ruler under natural or ceremonial conditions halted all war declarations until succession was resolved. That process could take years. The warlords exchanged glances, some suspicious, but none spoke. To accuse without evidence would stain their own honor. Arya's hand brushed Elias' sleeve under the table, a subtle signal. They had succeeded. Elias bowed slightly toward the throne. "I mourn the loss of a great leader. May your next ruler bring lasting peace to both our peoples." The words were spoken evenly, without triumph, but every council observer knew what had just been avoided. The walk back through the war palace was silent. Zorathian guards lined the halls, their armor reflecting the red light of torches. None moved to stop them. Once inside the shuttle, Arya finally spoke. "You ended a war before it began." Elias strapped into his seat. "No. I ended this war." Her gaze lingered on him. "And the next one?" "That," Elias said, "is for another day." The shuttle disengaged from the landing platform, rising past the jagged spires of the war palace. Below, the city stretched in black stone and crimson banners, a predator's nest now without its alpha. As the Resolute came into view, Elias watched the capital grow smaller. The dagger rested in its sealed case beside him, its blade untouched since the strike. Through the viewport, Zerath Prime began to shrink into the distance. Arya broke the quiet. "Do you ever think about the man who carried that dagger the first time?" Elias' eyes stayed on the fading planet. "Every time I hold it. And I think about what he'd say if he knew we still fight wars, just with different weapons." She didn't press further. The hum of the engines filled the silence, steady and low. In the council's official record, the death of King Zareth V would remain exactly as it had been announced, an unexpected neural failure during the ceremonial close of talks. The war that might have burned through human colonies would not come, not yet. Elias knew better than to believe in permanent peace. But he also knew the Zorathians would think twice before underestimating humans again. They would remember the envoy who walked into their throne room unarmed and left without firing a shot, yet took their king with him. As the Resolute slipped back into quantum corridors, the stars bent around them, and Elias allowed himself one last look at the sealed case. Humanity didn't survive by fighting every battle. It survived by winning the right ones.